Okay, very brief recap for those that were not here before or may have missed a session, or because I was out of town last week, and for any other reason you'd like, we'll just do a very brief recap. So we're studying a discourse, and for those of you that are regular know that you can just pop in on a Sunday and still walk away with some value, even if you don't get the whole flow. We're studying a discourse on prayer, and in the first chapter was established that prayer is an exercise, or it's more than an exercise. It's an opportunity for us to create, to internalize the relationship that we have with God, or to embody the relationship that we have with God, to actually experience that relationship. It's not just external lip service. It's an actual, it's actual work. It's toil. You're working hard at moving intellectual ideas, meditative ideas, into to transform them into experiential experiences. Sorry for the redundancy. So we do that through meditation, contemplation. We contemplate the ideas that we study, the ideas about God, the ideas about creation, the ideas about purpose. And during prayer, we meditate on them. And in that meditative process, we move them from an intellectual idea into an experiential experience. The Rebbe emphasized that meditation is not something that happens passively. It's not something, it's not a hit and run. You got to actually take the time and put the effort in. And the meditation has to be based on ideas that are truthful, meaning it's not, we don't have the luxury of just coming up with our own spiritual insights and then creating this mountain that we've created for ourselves and then meditating on that. There has to be a source, a truthful source for the particular meditation and engagement. So in chapter 3, the first part of the chapter, on page 43, 42, 43, if you don't have the copies, they're up here. He says that sometimes somebody will formulate their own ideas, and there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, in other words, you come up with your own idea, and then you get excited about your idea, right? That happens a lot in life. People create mountains for themselves, and then they get excited about the mountains that they created for themselves. But that's one thing if you want to get excited in general, but when you're trying to get excited about God, and you created a mountain for yourself, and then you're getting excited about your mountain, so there's a couple of questions here. Number one, is the idea true? Just because you came up with an idea doesn't make it true. Is the whole foundation for what you're meditating on truth? And even if it is your inspiration truthful? And as we discussed last time, that sometimes you can hear a great sermon, and the sermon is very exciting, and you're very moved by it, but it lasts, probably as long as it takes to get to your lunch meal. It's not sustainable, because it's not integrated, it's not built on a true foundation. And even if it is a true foundation, because the investment of time and energy and effort to truly internalize the experience isn't there, it's not real and it's not internalized. Yes.
So basically, you're saying it may be subjectively true for you. It might resonate with you. However, there has to be like an objective truth to it so that it's real and long lasting.
Yeah. Let me qualify that, because if you're studying something and you find, and in other words, so the source is a truthful source, you do have to personalize it, right? We do have to own the idea. The issue isn't, we're not asked to be robots here. On the contrary, this whole experience actually requires a profound investment of self. But the investment of self has to be built on a foundation of truth. If it's not built on a foundation of truth, you're not in the pursuit of a relationship with God, you're in the pursuit of a relationship with self. Right? So that's the key here. So as a most basic, it has to come from Torah and Torah sources. That's the foundation. You have good teachers that are rooted in Torah and Torah sources, so then we can trust that their teachings are well-founded. Good morning. Take both of them.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go to the bottom of 43, just to get us back in the flow. And I actually want to try to move a little swiftly through this chapter, because I don't want to say anything is not that important, but I want to move through this to get to the meat of the discourse. So he says like this, the bottom of the page in parentheses. One who is was a deep, great scholar, and therefore their ideas. You have people that are very deep. They're able to come up with great philosophical ideas. So and then they subsequently invest this idea over a substantial part of the prayer. In other words, you get onto a theme. It's a deep theme, it's a profound theme, and then you begin to find that link throughout different psalms and different parts of prayer. Or he has multiple insights in one prayer. And the result of that is his soul is elevated. He feels elevated. And he really is elevated. We mentioned this idea before, that one of the main purposes of prayer is to elevate us out of our self-absorption, if you would, right? If you want to understand, if you want to connect, well, let's take it down. Let me take me down. Okay. If you're in a relationship with someone and you're bumping up against some tension in the relationship, the worst thing you want to do is get caught up in your own ego, because then things are just going to blow up, right? If you're in a relationship with someone and there's some tension, the best thing you can do is to actually find humility within yourself, right? Where they say God is in the pause. It's like, stop, take a deep breath, get yourself grounded, get out of your animal brain, and let's get refocused. Now, if we want to get close to God, we have to do the same thing. We have to remove ourselves and our ego from that interaction and open ourselves up to experiencing something that doesn't necessarily live in our consciousness, in our external consciousness, because our external consciousness is caught up with self. So the very exercise of praying, utilizing this method of meditation to think about lofty ideas, whether you're thinking about one idea and it follows through the prayer, or you're thinking about multiple ideas, that exercise alone creates a refinedness within ourselves to open us up to sense something of a higher ethereal nature. I'm not even talking about godly, just on a higher ethereal nature. A person who spends their whole day in indulgent in food and drink and self pleasures, it's very hard for them to be open to an ethereal idea, a refined idea, a spiritual idea, a godly idea. Now, all of us are going to have to be involved in our body at some point during the day. We need that for survival. We need to eat, we need to drink, we need to work. But the goal is not to define ourselves by that, but define ourselves by the inner dimension of who we are. And prayer is an opportunity for us to reset into that place. So that's what he's saying. So a person who's going to meditate on one idea over multiple chapters or multiple ideas over multiple chapters, that elevates the person. It lifts the person's spirit out of their coarseness, out of their material state. ובדרך כלל העניין חקיקה מבחוץ לפי שוד היינו צחצוח חיצוניוס הכלי, אבל אינו מחזיק זמן רב בלשון יידיש es halten nicht asach Zeit. I'm finish the paragraph. כי מעל ידי רוב על איזה שויס לבד ויכול להיות חצי יום ולפעמים גם על יום שלם ולפעמים אין זה שייך מאומה. He says something very radical here. He says even though that this elevates the person out of their indulgent state, out of their self-absorbed state, we call this in Hasidic and Kabbalistic language, engraving. So we know that there's the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, ink on parchment, and then you have the tablets which were engraved. So when you engrave something, you take a stone, or you take a piece of gold or whatever it might be, and from the outside, you make the engraving. So it's something that's influencing you on an external way, even if it actually digs into the stone or the material, it still is something happening from the outside, meaning it's not deeply connected with the essence of the person. And that's the parallel he's drawing here, that even though a person may be elevated as a result of their meditation, but since the meditation is not founded on that truthful source, and it doesn't show up with the effective preparation, so the inspiration is going to be short-lived. And he says that he uses Yiddish language in general in these discourses. When Yiddish is used, it's intended to make emphasis. If you know Yiddish, it's great. If not, you take my word for it. So it says like this: Es halt nit asach Zeit, which means it doesn't hold for a long time. He says sometimes it lasts maybe for a half a day, maybe for a whole day, but at the end of the day, it's not sustainable. It's not effective. And this also is what we call general and peripheral service. As we said, there's the Hasidic saying that one who plows a field and seeds a field, then when it rains, it grows. But if you don't plow the field, you don't seed the field, it could rain from today till tomorrow, nothing's going to grow. So if you take the time to prepare for prayer, as we've been discussing and as we will continue to discuss, so then when the inspiration hits, it's real, it's sustainable. But if you just try to rush through it, the inspiration may feel like it's real, but it's all peripheral, it's not real, and it's not internalized. Yes?
That, say for example, I would say, I would consider an inherent emphasis on lawful appreciation boundaries or lawful appreciation of the land and completely disregarding everything it discusses how forests are treated or I've heard any deviation from sexual like this strange fire. But that's what that offer is. You were talking about that strange fire of protection. Or things about food that are used to shame and control. Over emphasis on certain, like as a point specifically control. And it's not that it's not in your face, it's in you can find it. If you see the overarching emphasis is on control and it's being used to influence how people think being told what to believe. And without any discussion of the truth, like balancing a great deal of discussion about the stranger. About certain people, supposed to be society. Those kinds of things, like how would you approach that in a spirit of humility, respectfully, but understanding that there's real harm in something that they're exposed to regularly.
So, if I understood you correctly, then I would say that I fundamentally disagree with the premise, which is that the Torah is about fear and control. You're saying it's utilized that way.
So that way, you can find those concepts in Torah to create.
Sure. Okay. So I apologize. I misunderstood you. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that you see people. I don't want to talk about other traditions because I want to stick to the Jewish tradition. So people, there are individuals who take Torah and for their own traumas or egos or whatever other tendencies, read Torah in a way that serves that trauma, that ego, or whatever else it might be. That's sad. And our job is to do what we're doing here, which is to study Torah in its joyous and loving way and live that in our own lives. And hopefully, as a result of that, influence others to get a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation for what Torah is really all about. We have to remember that I think this was kind of my theme in my talk yesterday, that we have to have compassion for people and where they're coming from, right? People inherently are good. People inherently want life and love and joy and connection, but people are influenced by all kinds of complexities that shape us into the people we are. And then all people, we people too, will utilize whatever it is in our periphery that serves our narrative if we're caught up in our ego. So, and that narrative could be the people in our sphere, the religion that we believe in. We'll read it away. By the way, the way I'm teaching this is influenced by understanding that I've come to over the last 20, 30 years. And I think it's kosher, and I think it's evolved. I think it's Torah evolved in a kosher way. It stays true to tradition, but it's totally embracing the brain science we know and the evolution of how a human being is shaped, and it's filled with compassion. But there are people that believe that this approach is not the approach of Torah. And I respect them. I don't agree with them, but I respect them. I've even had a whole discussion Thursday night with a bunch of yeshiva students that were here, that they were more curious than opinionated. That the reality is that we're living in a much more expansive world. We know so much more today than we did in the past. And I think that to my mistaken understanding of your question, I think the truths of Torah support this. We just have to read them the right way. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are going to manipulate Torah for their own agenda. And I think we need to have compassion for them and try to live a more joyous life connected to Torah, and that influences people.
We also, as individuals, need to have the responsibility of critical thinking. And if we're being exposed to certain ideas that we feel are inherently evil or manipulative or not for truth and goodness, then as individuals, we have a responsibility to reject that. I mean, yeah, we live in a world where we're constantly being bombarded with information everywhere. We don't really necessarily know what's truth and what's not truth. That's very difficult. It's very difficult to find truth.
Yeah.
So I think critical thinking is that we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and take responsibility for what type of information and why we take.
Yeah, I want to get back into the discourse. I just want to make one final comment on that. adding to what you said, I think the key for me is to, when we look, I'll tell you a quick story. It says the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, had a student who left the fold. And one Friday night, the Baal Shem Tov was walking with his students, and they passed by a pub. And they look through the window and they see this student that had left the fold is sitting there on Shabbos, on the Shabbat, hanging out with all these peasants and doing whatever they were doing. And one of the students says to the Baal Shem Tov, "Do you see that? Do you see that?" So Baal Shem Tov listens patiently to this man, to this student, and he says, "Are you jealous?" So what's the point? The point is that if you're coming from a place of love, you don't have to take up God's sword. It doesn't mean you don't have a perspective, but when somebody gets angry at the evildoers, and you get fired up, you got to look yourself in the mirror. I'm not saying that the premise isn't correct, but you got to look yourself in the mirror. Just very quickly, go ahead.
You are trying to be submissive. You do not want to be. You don't want to have the Holy Spirit. You're seeking to have a spirit to move. You recognize that there's flaws in your leadership in Catholic, but you're starting to see those pieces that are incredibly destructive or toxic. But there's really good stuff there too, like sifting and the damage that comes out of that. Like when you really want to find that path of submission, that path without just rolling over and accepting every, they're good, they mean well, and a lot of their teachings are good. What do you do then?
We can parse that out, but I think it's off topic and I want to get back on it. So I'm happy to talk with you after the class. Okay. Middle of 45, 44, 45. Chilukim da yeshenim asher lamdu harbe dach v'yedem kamen yana barichas bar hetiv lepalmim kishmamtzim eze inyan beze pirish kanal hu ayisoid inyan sheyedei mekfar barichas v'gam ata b'hamtza zu ari umizbeinim ba barichas ubepratius al piyasidis hanyanal. He's further dissecting this category of people, and he says that you have people who are well versed in Torah, they're well versed in these ideas. And on occasion, they introduce new ideas on the foundation of what they know already, right? And then they meditate on the things that they've introduced. He says something very interesting, that when it comes to philosophical ideas, right? So we're saying your foundation is a kosher one. It's a true foundation. And then you meditate on those ideas and you come up with a new idea. And then you get excited about your new idea because it's my idea, right? I came up with a new idea, so my ego is invested in that. And he quotes a Yiddish saying that a person prefers their own leg than the other person's head, right? It's my idea. I like my idea better than I like your great philosophy. So in a certain sense, he's saying, okay, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that fundamentally. But you have the youth who look at these older people who actually are well-versed, but they haven't learned that. So the youth who don't necessarily have this whole foundation, and they're trying to mimic these greater accomplished spiritual individuals and try to mimic that, it doesn't work the same way. Because for the older individuals who have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, okay, they are able to then take their introduction and in some way internalize it. But the young ones that come along and they're trying to mimic, it doesn't go in, it's not internalized. And especially the young ones, page 46, who haven't even really opened up the basics of the teachings of Jewish mysticism, barely have seen everything. And amongst those, there are those who perform stunts, attempting to find new insights in prayer. We call that shtick, right? It's not real. I'm going to elaborate on this in a moment. V'lahem ke'iser mamish u'miskalka b'zet chunas nafshim b'kabbalas eze inyan shelo yuchel kabel eze inyan b'harchev u'ba'asaga tevo k'meikein ma'oimek amiti rechokim heim moed v'lo yuchel kabel. Okay, I have to give you a little intro to the point that he's making here, so that it drives home. There's a Yiddish saying that Chassidus mont pnimius, that the practice of the Chassid, especially in Chabad philosophy, which is fundamentally the practice of one who's engaged in a legitimate Jewish spiritual practice, is, and Tifa, maybe this goes to your point a little bit, or your question a little bit, is about navigating that our outside should reflect our inside. We need to be real and authentic, right? It doesn't mean we need to be perfect, but we're constantly looking to live truthfully. That's the agenda. Good morning. That's the agenda. We're looking to live truthfully. So in order to live truthfully, we had it in, not yesterday, but last week's Torah portion, we had the commandment regarding not taking bribe. So it says, don't take bribe, because bribe blinds the eyes of the wise, and it makes crooked the word, it makes blind the eyes of the wise, and it makes crooked the words of the righteous. What does that mean? Bribe, nobody is going to take bribe and consciously, no, I shouldn't say nobody, there's some really bad people out there, but most good people that are susceptible to bribe are not going to say, okay, you gave me $100,000, so therefore I'm going to pervert the justice and do exactly opposite, of what the law says. The way it works is, because you bribed me, so my thinking now goes, oh, yeah, I can see the law goes your way. We're learning in Talmud, Stanley and I, that sometimes even saying good morning to someone, reminding them of a kindness that you once did, that's bribe. Love for our children, love for our spouse, that's bribe. Self-love is the greatest bribe, right? When you say, look, you've got this fault, I say, what are you talking about? What do you know about me? But if I go myself and look in the mirror, I know exactly what they're talking about. But I'm not going to let you know, because I love myself, and I don't want you to be in on what I know about myself, right? So the nature of that self-love, that self-bribe, is such that we are able to convince ourselves, and this may resonate with some of you, that we came up with an idea, and then once we came up with an idea, then we built meditation on the idea that I came up with, and I'm getting inspired from my own idea. It's laughable in a sense, right? In terms of a human condition. I came up with an idea, and now I'm inspired from my own idea. Who do you think you are that you can come up with ideas and then inspire yourself to your own ideas? I'm not saying that we have to divorce ourselves, but we have to put it in context of that, right? You have to put it in context of what is it that I'm getting inspired by? Is it truth? Or is it my own machinations, my own fantasies that I created, and now I'm inspiring myself? When I was in yeshiva, in Los Angeles, and there was a group of older yeshiva students that got into a conflict with the head of the yeshiva, and they wanted to punish the head of the yeshiva, so they convinced my whole class, or most of my class, to leave the yeshiva the next year and go to a different yeshiva. And of course, they didn't sell it to us that way. They said, oh, this is going to be good for you as a group, whatever. Anyway, I became convinced. And then the head of the yeshiva started meeting with each of the students to try to break this rebellion. So he says to me, he says, what are your reasons for leaving? And I gave him all my reasons. So he said, I want to tell you a story. I think this story happened with the Rebbe known as the Kutzker Rebbe. He says that one time the Kutzker Rebbe asked the students, how do you shoot an arrow into a target? So he says there's two ways. one way you shoot an arrow into a target is you draw the target, and then you go with your arrow, and you aim for the center, and you keep on trying to hit the target. So the other way is you put the arrows in the wall, and then you draw your target around it. So he said, if the target was there and you're shooting the arrow and it's landing in the center, okay, that's good. But if you put your arrows there first, and now you're creating all the reasons for why you already, for the decision you've already made, that's not authentic. And that's the subtlety he's trying to tell us here, is that when the younger students, or the younger Hasidim, the younger people who are beginning this kind of practice of prayer, look and they see these older people who've got experience, they've been doing this for years, and they say, oh, I'm just going to mimic them. You're on the wrong train. You should be inspired by them, but you got to start from grade one. You got to work your way up there. You can't push yourself into that place. You got to work your way there. What does it say in Karate Kid? Wax on, wax off, right? You got to put your time in, one step at a time, one day at a time. You work your way. You can get there, but it's going to require an authenticity, and the authenticity starts with a recognition that there's a truth out there that I'm going to have to work to arriving at. And the real humility is that even when you think you've arrived, you still don't think you've arrived. Once you think you've arrived, you're done. Yes.
See what you're saying, not just in photo, but for example, I mean, my nephews who went to good colleges are just inundated with a lot of them, in my opinion, just like BS propaganda. They're young and they just absorb that, and then they form opinions that I feel with my age and wisdom and understanding history, and I'm kind of referring to Israel right now, actually. And this is a big problem in my family, that they're just going with like their whole generation, and just thinking, believing things that, from my perspective, are false and dangerous and really sad. And I attribute to the youth, and I also attribute to a lot of colleges teaching things that are really probably funded by some bad sources, some funding, and I can't change my mind, and we'll just regurgitate.
Yeah.
Colleges, they just want to have the experience and the knowledge and the wisdom.
Yeah. What you're saying is, resonates well, and I think it emphasizes the point that's being made here, that there's nothing new under the sun. Like, this is not new. It just happens to be an issue that touches us as Jews very deeply. But that's the nature of youth. Youth don't have perspective of maturity, right? And we get excited about things. I say we because I'm still youth, right? We get excited about things because we're emotional beings. So we get excited about something, and what happens is the emotional excitement then convinces our brains that this is the truth.
That they're on the right side.
That you're on the right side of things, instead of having the maturity to step aside from something and like you said earlier, to look at things with critical thinking. That's something. So what happens as we get older is we're able to create a greater separation between the brain and the heart. But actually, I want to tell you that's what this is all about. This is what I mentioned. I talked at length our last class about the IFS, the internal family systems kind of therapy. That's what prayer is. Prayer is our opportunity to get in touch with the fact that we are made up of multiple parts. What happens when we get get excited emotionally is it takes us over. Like there's one entity here that's excited or angry or fearful or whatever it is, but we're not. The heart is one part of us. The animal soul is just one part of who we are. We have a godly soul, and the godly soul rests in the brain. So the brain has the capacity to work with the animal soul to understand what's really going on, to be able to create separation. But until we get in touch with the fact that there are multiple parts of who we are, when we get triggered for whatever reason, the train's left the station. So prayer, the function of meditation in prayer helps us begin to see ourselves with these parts and to operate accordingly from there.
Have algorithms that are basically just reinforcing anything that we have. And that's really hard. That's really
Yeah.
hard.
It is. It's a challenging time we live in, no question. In general, once we embrace, once we become convinced of a perspective that we've created for ourselves, right? To use the modern language, once you've developed a narrative, it's very difficult to change that narrative. And it becomes delusion and inaccurate reasoning, that it doesn't lead to any good endeavor in a positive way. And surely it does not lead to real truthful meditation in prayer, which, as we said in chapter 1, is necessary to create change within our character. And one who seeks the life of their soul, in other words, if your pursuit is truthful, one should run away like a bow shot away. And one shouldn't be preoccupied in this approach of trying to novelize new ideas, rather to study and to know well the material that's there. And then when that's your intention, then it's possible that on occasion something truthful will come out of that. Who told us so all of this, in other words, this whole chapter is very important, even though the chapter fundamentally was in parentheses, but it's important for us to be able to contrast what we're going to talk about, which is internal prayer. In other words, we have to sometimes see what is it that's not real, that doesn't really work, that's not effective, that's a preoccupation with self, so that we can then contrast to what is real. And what is real, he kind of emphasizes through the negative at the end of the chapter, and that all of this comes about on account of a laziness or neglect of one being willing to toil in a truthful manner in service as is necessary. In other words, if we truly want to reach this level of honesty and meditation that's founded on truth, it's not easy. It requires a lot of work. You got to put in a lot of effort. And it's oftentimes easier to live in your fantasy, so to speak, in your narrative, than to actually be willing to put your narrative aside to really hear a different approach. Yes.
Spend all these years under whatever visibility to the rest of the sound is. And we're feeling the sound.
What is this meaning? What's the meaning of this meaning? Struggle with God. You know that comes from it. And before you use the word submit, that kind of bothers me a little bit. Islam is just about Jesus. Struggle with it and make it good. And so let's stay with this.
So let's bring it back here for a second. We can debate a specific language and its intentionality, but I want to focus on the core point here, which is if you were to see a student, the young student that he's referring to here, we don't say, "Hey, you idiot! You're just you're climbing up alleys that don't belong to you. We're going to throw you out of here." That's not the objective here. The objective here is for us that are studying this, or the student that is studying this, to be able to get themselves aligned. It's to intensify the frequency of their perception that just because something makes sense, and just because something feels good, and just because something feels godly and spiritual and holy, doesn't mean that it is. It all can be a figment of your imagination. And the reality is that we're never going to know fully if we are invested in something that is entirely truthful. But we have to toil at that. And as soon as you think you got it all figured out, that's the first sign you got nothing figured out, right? What we can know is that we're plugged in to a source of truth, and we have to be discerning about, just because somebody says something is Torah doesn't make it Torah, right? We have to make sure that the source is correct, and we have to make sure the source is in alignment with this layer of truth. And then we have to invest ourselves in really comprehending it. And if it ever comes too easy, it probably is not the real level of truth that it's all about. Because as your mother told you, life is not fair and life is not easy. It's just the way it is. So it's not that when and this also goes to the point we made in the last few classes, that when you encounter something that you realize that yesterday's service wasn't truthful, it doesn't mean you got to be hard on yourself. You've actually graduated. Isn't that great? I realized that whatever I thought yesterday that I was in alignment, okay, that was good for yesterday, but I'm at a different level today. So alignment today means something more than it meant yesterday. We don't have to beat ourselves up. And even if our whole foundation for what we believed yesterday was totally false, that's great. Now I know truth, right? We have to stop. We don't have to be angry at ourselves and beat up on ourselves. And even if you encounter someone who, based on their belief system, and you thought that they were a great teacher, or you read a book that you thought was a great book that had the insights, and then you realize that it wasn't, okay, that's part of God's master plan. We don't have to get angry. We don't have to throw things out, and we don't have to throw people out, and so on and so forth. We have to continue navigating the journey. And again, if you get triggered by in a way of anger and resentment, that means you got to look deeper within yourself. Okay, let's go on to chapter 2. I'm sorry, chapter 4. If you don't have chapter 4, the copies are here. And let's see what is the proper approach of meditation. In other words, we spoke about what's not the proper approach. Let's talk about what the proper approach is. Page 48, 49. Amnam havodah mitis hi biyagia b'tfila biyagias nefesh v'yagias basar. Listen to these words. True service requires toil of the spirit and toil of the flesh. In other words, it's not just an ethereal work. If you've ever done like intense emotional work, there's so many different modes of what that might look like, but if this is landing with you, you'll understand what I mean. You physically are exhausted after you've done that intense emotional work. That's called toil of the flesh. So when you're meditating in an effective way on God and God's relevance in your space, in your world, in your consciousness, so obviously that's toil of the soul, toil of the spirit. But if you do it right, it's toil of the flesh as well. You're bringing the self, the real self, to the experience. Yes. So I think that is helpful, right? And all mitzvahs have a physical counterpart to it, but it doesn't have to be that you physically are doing anything outside of your body. It's the internal experience of doing this work, this meditative work, contemplating.
Why you need a Shabbos nap.
Exactly. Let me give you, I'll give you a simple example. I think is a simple example. you're in a relationship with someone, and you're also aware of your own triggers, and they say something to you, and you get triggered, but you're aware that you just got triggered, and you're aware that if you say something, you're going to blow up the relationship. So you should keep your mouth shut. But in keeping your mouth shut, you also know that they're not wrong. In other words, that this is a you problem. You've got to figure out why, and maybe you even know that the reason why that thing that they just said to me triggered me is because of this thing or the other thing, a childhood wound and an early experience in my life, whatever it might be. But just because you know that, it doesn't mean that you don't want to shoot your mouth off at this other person. So you're at war within yourself, right? That is exhausting. It's exhausting. And it's hard. And you may even break a sweat, literally. Literally, you may even break a sweat. That's called toil of the flesh. Now, when it comes to us, okay, we're not getting triggered, but we're choosing to meditate on profound ideas about God and God's presence in our world, or God's presence in the supernal worlds. If I'm meditating effectively at that, it's going to activate me to the point that it will feel like a lot of hard work. That's what he's telling us.
That could also make experience that one profound.
For sure. It's visceral. Yeah. And it's supposed to be that, again, if we're contrasting to what we said in the last chapter, that's the way it's supposed to be, right? It is supposed to feel in our body, and it's not supposed to be easy. Yes.
So if you're there and someone's verbs are abusive to a new child or to a new child, so you're answering directly, you're saying there's some truth to that, so I should respond to that and it's sort of go on.
No, so let me qualify. It's a great question. Let me qualify it. When the student of the Baal Shem Tov saw the man sitting in the pub, he wasn't wrong in his awareness that this was a fellow who had left the great teacher of the Baal Shem Tov and left that. And he wasn't saying something that wasn't true. The issue was the judgment. That's the issue. That's what the Baal Shem Tov called out. When there's an interesting law in the Torah that says that if you see, it's called a pursuer. You see a person chasing another person with a knife. And it's very obvious to you that the pursuer is trying to murder the other guy. So you have a mitzvah to kill the pursuer. That's your mitzvah. That's called saving a life, right? You kill the murderer, you save a life. Now there's a warning. It's not a warning. It's a subtle warning that's brought down, is that make sure that you are not guilty of murder when you kill the murderer, because God will exact punishment from you. In the Talmud it says that be careful how you rebuke, because you'll tell someone, hey, you've got a little splinter, and they're going to reply to you, hey, I got a splinter, you got a beam, right? You know, you're telling me to take out this little splinter, you got a 2x4 stuck inside of you, right? So instead of being effective, it's gonna fire back. Now, the question isn't whether you should do the right thing when someone is attacking you. You got to protect yourself. Someone's attacking your family. The question is what is your, this is the subtlety and the honesty that we have to arrive at, is my response coming from truly a place of love and desire to protect, or is my ego bruised here? you got to do the right thing in the moment. Most of the situations we encounter aren't that black and white, right? It's not so clear that there's a choice right now to do something right or not do something right. It's usually much more about an emotional reaction. And the emotional reaction then defines the thinking that we then justify how we're gonna react. So if I had a conversation some years ago with a rabbi about this idea. It was not a Chabad rabbi. We spoke about this idea of, and I don't want to get into a conversation specifically about it, but it was a question about Israel's responsibility to defend itself. And I asked him a question. I said, if you're walking down a street and somebody comes over and pulls out a gun at you, you're walking with your wife and your kids, they pull out a gun at you, and you have a gun, and you know that you can shoot them before they shoot you. Would you hesitate for a second to shoot that person? And he couldn't answer the question. Whatever. To me, that's an unhealthy emotional response. In other words, his trigger is not to defend his family in that regard, which I think begs analysis, right? What's going on inside of you that you wouldn't fight for your family? Because there's a discomfort in the fact that I might have to kill another person. Okay, in the name of protecting my family, I'll do it. But if I have a tendency for murder, again, it doesn't mean I shouldn't protect my family. I just need to be aware that maybe I'm going to be called out on it. Which, by the way, again, if we take it down from an intense kind of scenario, bring it down into this kind of interaction that one might have with a loved one, and they say something that triggers you, it doesn't mean that they're wrong that they're right in their communication or what it is that they're saying. The question is, if your response comes from an anchored place, from a place of alignment, that you know that you're aware that your trigger is coming from something within you, and you get yourself anchored, then you're able to communicate more effectively about the actual issue that may be wrong. And it doesn't necessarily need to blow up. Furthermore, if you know that the other person is going to get triggered from your conversation, then maybe it's not your place to even say it. You can't change people. It's their own journey. I remember Rabbi Manis Friedman once was giving a parenting class, and he said, when your child is doing something wrong, so parents have a tendency to tell the child, hey, what you're doing is not right. And then they launch into a lecture as to why it's not right. Right? That's a tendency that people have. Anybody ever experienced this growing up? Nobody? Unbelievable. You guys grew up, that your parent would say to you, hey, stop doing that. When you do that, you're acting like all those bums on the street. Or, you're just not really aware. Like, you really need to be a person who's more aware of your bodily movements, and so you don't hurt whatever lecture you might get after you get the action, right? The instruction regarding the action, which is a normal parenting thing to do, because we love our children and we want to educate them. So we first stop the behavior, and we think it's important that we have to then back up our instruction with the philosophy behind it. He says, this was his advice. He said, if you want to be effective, tell your child in this moment what is the correct behavior, and don't give them any lectures. Come back 24 hours later and say, by the way, yesterday when you were doing such and such, I want to tell you that, there was, when I was growing up, I remember this man, that person, this experience. In other words, give them a context for why is that so important to do it 24 hours later? Because what you're demonstrating to your child is you actually care about them. You actually care enough about their behavior to educate them. And it's no longer visceral. It's not like, oh, I did this, so therefore, you're actually educating them around the principle. So, yeah, exactly. So back to your question. This is not a black and white synergy here, where if I'm getting triggered, so therefore the reaction is wrong. Or if I'm getting triggered, that means the triggerer is right. Every scenario needs to be analyzed and understood, and so on. The first thing is when I'm getting triggered, I'm no longer operating from a place of alignment. I'm operating from my animal soul. That's number one.
You're in a fight or flight response.
I'm in a fight or flight response.
Physiological.
Yes.
Cortisol.
So that's number one. Number one is I'm not operating from a place of alignment. Number two, when I then have to look at the scenario in a depersonalized way. What's the right thing to do? Now, granted, when it's truly a life situation, then you do have to react, and hopefully your moral foundation is in alignment, so your reaction is going to be the correct one, right? But we have to analyze that nonetheless. Yes.
Well, the thing that it's fair to, like, premise was, like, I was real happy that you feel for his house paid off and the stabbing. But then you might not have, like, can't be a priest. So there's a consequences for these. It would be like, there's a separation between persons, if you can. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you pursue lines of certain lines of justice, if you would have, like, you know, if blood is in your life like that, then you're separated. It isn't like, it's not that there's a dissatisfaction and happiness. That's not a.
Yeah.
It's just a separation.
Yes, I agree. That the reality is our consequences for actions. To do the right thing oftentimes comes at a price. That's the reality. Yeah. Okay. So this is the idea of toiling. Toiling means that we actually physically invest ourselves in this meditation. Toiling the brain with great concentration and profound attachment, mit der starke Zugetragenheit, with an intense focus, bahamuskel, in the intellectual idea first. So the first thing is one needs to meditate on the concept itself, right? To really think about the idea. This is really really for the most part a lost art, right? Just like you can even try this today, especially if you take the book or the copy home with you. Just try it for 10 minutes. Try to close your eyes and deeply concentrate on the sequence of ideas that are discussed here. Don't read it. You can read it first, but then close your eyes and think about it. Just review the content in your head. That's not something that we do when we cram for a test, right? We're not actually thinking about the material. We're just reading it over and over again, and hopefully we remember it, or you walk around the room like repeating the memorization of the specific facts that you might need, but you're not downloading it. You're not really bringing it into your being, and maybe for a lot of things you don't need to. Yes.
When I sleep at night, that's what I do.
Okay, great. And by the way, there is a value to that, but that's happening subconsciously. And we're talking about here, it's effortless. It's effortless when you sleep. What we're talking about here is the efforting that goes into actually internalizing the intellectual ideas. That's the first step. So that's toil. And if it sounds foreign to you, it's because it's toil, right? Because it's not something that we usually do, because we don't like to toil very much. Okay. And to bring oneself to the idea through other explanations, other ideas that the person already knows, or what you introduce in that moment. In other words, I'll give you the example that we gave before, is that passage in the prayer that says, don't trust in man, in the Son of Man that doesn't have any salvation, because the spirit leaves them, and on that day all their machinations returns to his spirit leaves him, he returns to the earth. On that day all of his machinations cease, right? So we explained that the idea is that what is the true identity of a human? It's the spirit. It's the divine light, the divine energy that gives the person life. So you take that life out of them, what do you have? You have a piece of meat. Okay, that doesn't mean that the meat is irrelevant because God chose to put that soul in this body. So you can think about this idea and really think deeply about what is the nature of the human being. Okay, once we think deeply about what is the nature of the human being, so let's understand what it means that the spirit leaves that person. And then let's apply that idea to other materialism. What's the real value of the steak that I'm about to dig into, or the apple or the orange that I'm getting so excited about? I don't know if people get excited about apples and oranges, but the steak people get excited about, right? You're getting excited. What are you excited about? Are you excited about the food? What is the food? The food is just a spirit that gives it the capacity for it to stay whole. And if the spirit were to be removed, the steak would disintegrate. It would cease to be. So what are you getting excited about? Right? And what are the other things in our lives that we get excited about? And we can contemplate and I'm being careful here. We don't want to depersonalize. We don't want to I don't want to personalize it yet too much, right? This is really an intellectual exercise. What is the nature of physicality? What is the nature of the true existence of the things that we see around us? It's really physicality that's energized by a divine energy, and the divine energy is removed, then the thing ceases to be. I just finished studying a discourse with someone where it says that if God were to remove his energy from the tree wouldn't die. It would just cease to be. Why? Because what is the tree? The tree is made up of the elements, and how do the elements stay together? That's in other words, literally, how do the elements bind together? So that's the word of God that allows the elements to bind together. So if the word of God is no longer there, then the elements fall apart. They separate. There's nothing binding them. Just like when you look in a telescope and you look at a matter, right? You see that it's a bunch of floating atoms, right? So what actually keeps them all together? It's the word of God that keeps them together. If the word of God wasn't there, then the atoms would just all float away. They would float away. They would cease to be. So and what would you have? Nothing. So what are you getting? So what is King David telling us? He says, don't trust in the man. Don't trust in the person. Don't get excited about the thing. Get excited about the divine energy that's in the man. Get excited about the divine energy that's in the food. Right? So this is what he's telling us here. What I just did verbally is what you can do in your head. You have an idea that you studied, and then you have other ideas that you may have studied elsewhere, and you apply these ideas to each other. Then you contemplate this idea at length, and then you get some new insight into it. And in getting some new insight, you're further internalizing the intellectual idea that was presented. Okay, to be continued next week.